Good morning. Thank you all for coming here. Really appreciate this opportunity to introduce myself and get introduced to you and your issues. I come from the state of Hawaii from before statehood. My father was a sergeant at Hickam Air Force Base in the mid-50s. My mother was a dental assistant and then a dental hygienist. They fell in love. And as they were raising their young family, they decided that they wanted to go back to the mainland for educational opportunities for me and job opportunities for my parents. And then I spent my formative years in public schools in Indianapolis, Indiana, followed by Jesuit Preparatory College School called St. Jean de Brebeuf Preparatory, which was an all-boy Jesuit school where we had to wear shirt and tie and learn to be young gentlemen. And thank you. And then I attended college in Washington State at Western Washington University in Bellingham, Washington, where I studied political science and policy development and administration. Shortly after college, I became involved in Save the Salmon movement. I had young children myself and had just been amazed how quickly the salmon went from being somewhat prolific because of the hatcheries to facing endangered species listings. The habitat had completely collapsed. The ecosystem couldn't support even the hatchery fish. Record runs turned into next to nothing. Businesses went under, including my own, Oakland Bay Outfitters. I had a hunting and fishing outdoor store on Hood Canal that because of the collapse of the fisheries we lost. And I went back again to college to start studying science and to be able to apply some science to policy development. I was a volunteer for a group called Trout Unlimited doing stream cleanups with my young children, and then started working for them in various positions. Over 26 years, I eventually became both their lobbyist in the state and in Washington, D.C., and then their president and CEO, and then their corporate executive. I served in many positions while doing that work, learned an awful lot about the environment, local government, state government, federal government. I served in the federal government in two capacities. One for the first George Bush on the United Nations Drift Net Removal Committee as the national vice chair. I also served on the U.S.-Canada negotiating team during the salmon wars of the 98, late 90s, when the Canadian fishermen did not allow American fishermen to pass through Canadian waters to go to Alaska to harvest in response to over-harvest by the commercial fleet and the tribal fleet. After sitting down with the parties for several years, we worked out a salmon plan that I helped author, as well as several other pieces of legislation that were integral to putting back the habitat necessary to begin salmon recovery. It's going to be a 100-year process, of which we're only 20 years into right now. While I was doing that, I also had to work with industry leaders to help them avoid taking the path of litigation to try to fight the lawsuits and realize that they could actually do something to change their behavior and their best management practices to get an exemption, Section 7 under the Endangered Species Act, to be able to continue to do their businesses during any possible moratorium while they were trying to recover salmon. It resulted in new building and construction, salmon-friendly policies, as well as different policies in both agriculture and in forestry and in fisheries management and harvest, and also in hatchery management. Those are some of the same issues, though, in the environment that we face here in Hawaii. And as an environmental consultant in Hawaii, I've also worked on near shore marine habitats and their recovery, reefs, and also on invasive species. During my time in Trout Unlimited National, I worked on with a group called the Toxics Coalition, where we worked on pesticide and herbicides, and I became fairly expert in the area because we were pushing to remove all pesticides and herbicides from interacting in the salmon habitat because we were sure that they went into the ecosystem and right into the fish, and we eat the fish. So as a result of a lawsuit that we threatened with the state of Washington and the federal government, we were able to get that moratorium and eventually complete removal of the use of toxic chemicals such as pesticides and herbicides in any area or subbasin where we have salmon-bearing streams. It affected about 80% of the area, topographical area of the state of Washington. We also did the same thing in Oregon, in an agreement with Oregon in the Columbia River Compact. I also served for a while on energy issues with Bonneville Power Administration on their Fish and Wildlife Committee over the relicensing of the dams on the Columbia River, and had to negotiate those relicenses with those industries and those utilities, including a $300 million upgrade to the turbines at Baker River and similar upgrades of the capital investments necessary at Cowlitz and Yale dams on the Lewis rivers. On the Elwha, a famous river that is in the Olympic Peninsula, we've actually now removed 2 dams and are recovering the habitat for the salmon, and have worked out an agreement to still provide electricity to both the mill and the town of Port Townsend without them losing anything. Those sort of solutions can happen. And I was fortunate enough to spend my last 26 winters here, although I would have to leave every January to do lobbying in Washington, D.C., Salem, Sacramento, and Olympia, Washington. But coming and going most of my adult life here, and I live in Ocean View, and I'm building a residence there, I've got a good vision of what this place is and what it should be in the future. And we really are a couple decades behind some of the stuff that we've been doing on the West Coast to rehabilitate and recover the productivity of our environment and to protect it for our future. We've also now gone into our 2nd decade, though, of use of environmental curriculums and producing jobs through pipelines in our schools and through our unions for natural resource work, both with the skilled and trade unions, but also with the professions. And I think we need to do the same thing here. We're poised here to get money from the federal government for the next 30 years for both monk seal, nearshore environment, and reef work, and we need to prepare ourselves the same way, just as we've talked about with the telescopes and the other sort of things. We need to be able to provide those sort of educational opportunities to our own children to be able to keep them here. And I would like it for my grandchildren, so that my extended family doesn't have to continue to live both on the mainland and here. And I think that the vision that I have is what we need on the council and in the mayor's office. The mayor does not make policy, he does not make legislation, but yet he's been allowed to lead us and advocate on our behalf far and wide. And as a result, we're ending up with a vision that's contemporary, if nothing else, based upon the past. And it isn't going to be adequate. And it takes community building about 20 to 30 years ahead of time. We're always got to be 20 to 30 years ahead of time if we're really going to get to where we need to be in 20 or 30 years. And so I'm prepared to bring that vision and that leadership to the council, and I ask